Hey everyone, welcome to another PragmaFlow video about doing cool things in Adalo. Often we focus on components, but today we're going to focus on some really, just using native Adalo functionality. One of the things that comes up really often is how do you make nice interactive forms? How do you use many-to-many objects in forms? How can you use related objects that have their own properties in forms again and make sure everything is connected properly? The forms widget does a lot of great things, and we all know it has a few limitations. One of them, again, is many-to-many objects. So we basically run into this issue where, hey, we want to create a checklist, right? I'm actually going to talk about the app in front of us just to illustrate one of the situations. So this app is really cool. It's one of our clients who is building it out with us. And this basically prepares parents so that they can take 3 days, and in those 3 days, they can end-to-end potty train their child, which is way better than most. It's data-driven, and so there is self-assessments and things like that to help guide parents to know if they and their kids are ready. And that's the page we're looking at now. So here is on the left side here, the child self-test, and this one is the user self-test, and they're basically identical. So I will only really walk us through one. And so the way this is built out is that we have we have the user. Just let's talk about the database a little bit. We have the user child test, and then we have this list of criteria. And so how do we link that all up, and how do we make that work nicely in a form? So here we have, for the child test, 7 criteria. The app is currently in Dutch, but it will be translated to English pretty soon. And we did put out a language translation component, so that might be a really good test of it. So basically what you can see here is all of the different criteria. So we want them to show up here. We want the user to check them off. And then at the end, we want the user to hit a button, and that record needs to be saved. And then there's a few other things, right? How do we handle if the user leaves in the middle of this? We think about maybe creating temporary records, but if we do that, one, it actually doesn't work. I tried that at first. And the reason it doesn't work is because you need to transfer all these relationships, and that I don't believe there's a really good way to do. But then let's say if you were to create a temporary object to store the data and save it at the end, then what happens when the user leaves? How do you bring that back, et cetera, right? And yeah, there just starts to become, as you think this through, there's so many paths the user can abandon the process. Do you create the real object and then just mark it as completed at the end? And if you are, anyway, so let me just show you what I did, and hopefully this will be some help to you. So the first thing is, when the user lands on this page, what we are doing as an action is we are creating a new user child test record, because that's what's going to store all the data. But we don't want to do this every time, because that would get really messy. So instead, what we are doing is, first of all, we have in progress true. Usually I would do, is it completed, rather than is it in progress? But in order to make this compatible with all the old records that didn't have this field, and because it's going to default to false, I needed, to phrase it in a way that it is true out of the gate, and then I set it to false, and that's going to match all the existing records, right? Because here what I'm saying is we are only going to do this if the count of the logged in users user child tests where in progress is true is equal to 0, right? And if I had done this in the other way, is completed is true, then it would be hard to look for the ones where is completed is false, because that would be every historic record that was done in the past, and that would not work. So just again, from the top, when the user lands on this page, we check if they have a current user child test in progress. And if they don't, then we create one for them. All right, now what's happening here? How do we link everything up? So we have this inner list. We're going to start with the inner list. This is a list of the child criteria. And so that's going to load up and then the user can check them off. But what does checking them off do, right? So actually, this is a list within a list. The outer list is going to load the current user test. And the way we're doing that is we're going to find the logged in users user child test where in progress is true. And we're going to make a maximum number of items, which is 1. And we're going to sort it from newest to oldest. Now, if everything's done well, we don't need the maximum number of items at 1, and we don't need to sort newest to oldest, but sometimes things don't go well. And so this is going to make sure that we're always showing the most recent one. I actually often don't like to set a maximum number of items, even in these situations, because if I see 5 lists, then I know that something's wrong somewhere else. And so often it can be useful not to hide breakages from yourself. In this case, it still was a bit useful to do. So we create, when the user lands on the page, we create this record if they don't already have one. This list is going to load the most recent record, whether it's the one that was just created or whether they started it 3 months ago, left the app, and only came back now, right? It's just finding the most recent record. And then when we click on these checkboxes, which are in the criteria list, which is inside of the user test list, then you've probably figured out what we're going to do is we're just going to include or attach the criteria to the user test. Now, of course, we've set up these relationships, and it's probably worth taking a quick peek into the database just to see how things are set up. So if we take a look at the user child test setup here, it's nothing too complicated. And so we have the relationship to child test criteria, which is a many-to-many, and then we have the relationship to the user. So with those two in place, we have everything we need. Now, this particular app actually has some conditions. Based on the outcome, based on the number of boxes that are checked, we're going to direct users to one of 2 screens, one which says, hey, you're ready, and the other which says, hey, sorry, you're not ready. And so once again, we are, now what's important is because we are going to that other page, and by the way, on that other page is where we're actually going to mark the record as complete. That's how we decided to do this, because once I click this button and continue to one of my modal pages, maybe I want to hit cancel and go back and edit this. So we decided that only when you click the OK button on this page is it actually going to update the record. And of course, the way it's going to update the record is by setting in progress to false. So then it'll no longer be loaded up here. And if the user comes back to this page, a new user test will be created. Now, because we are updating this record on the next page, we actually have to pass the record data to that page. And so this button over here is in a list. And that list is exactly configured exactly the same as the checklist above. Now, I played with the idea of putting these in the same list, and you could argue that would be a good idea because then it's just one list that's loading on the page. The reason I didn't do it was because I couldn't figure out how to make the layout work nicely in the same way. As you see, there is actually a group and a box here that I've done. This is a rectangle because the button was disappearing behind here. And when I show you, actually, if I show you how the page scrolls, just how we set it up. Oh, it's funny. I had forgotten to update. Oh, by the way, this is a little random thing, but reload frame is an incredibly useful way to update your app without refreshing the entire page. I just learned that. So you can see the way the scrolling is done, and this rectangle actually is just translucent. I'm not sure if there's a way to do a transparency gradient, which would be the best effect, but this still does a nice job of cleaning things up while still giving, not a weirdness of like a harsh break. And yeah, so basically just the way to get this scrolling properly, that's why I did that rectangle. So just wrapping everything up now, this button is a list. It loads the same user test as here. And then when you continue to the next page, it's passing that data so that we can update this record on the next page. And there are 2 conditions. So if the current user child tests criteria count is greater than 2, then okay, you're ready to continue. And if it is not greater than 2, then you are not ready to continue. And so that's how the conditional forwarding is happening. So I can show you now through this process right here. I'm going to click for them. Okay, and there we are. Although that didn't look like the yes page. It would be really funny if this failed in the demo. Crazier things have happened. Let's take a look. So we have user child test records. That's the one I want to look at. Now, don't worry, all of this is test data. None of it is user data. And hilariously enough, this didn't work out as I was hoping. So we'll have to figure out why it didn't create that new record. Or is it just that the database hasn't updated for some reason? Well, this kind of ruins the video a little bit. On the other hand, it's fun to show that not everything always works out as perfectly as we hope. And sometimes things we've already gotten working just break anyways. So let's see really quickly here. What could be the issue? The issue could be that perhaps I, as a user, I'm just not looking far enough and I already had a test in progress. So let me gently scroll down and just see if that is the case. Oh yeah, here, this is already in progress. So the issue is that I did go to the wrong page and it didn't update. Let's delete this one and see what happens. So I think the issue is with the redirection. Let's just reload this frame. Oops, wrong reload button. Oh, well. So here, let's go to the self-test. Can't get a win right now, huh? What is happening? Oh. So we have the condition that if the count of my user's records, which are not completed, is 0, then I should get a new record. And we know that this has been working well already. And it's unlikely that this past record is causing the issues. However, you can see here that this has basically done its job in the past. So let's just push through this a little bit more and see. There it is. Okay, so it turns out to have just been maybe loading issue, and I got impatient. So we have now this fresh new test. Let's go 1 and 2. And if we click here, it is saying I did not get to the right criteria, the right number. So now I have 4, and that should be enough, but it still isn't. Let's try checking all of them just to see. It's funny why this count wouldn't work. Although there are some Adalo bugs, some known bugs around count. So let's see again what happened here. So this worked. My child test criteria did attach. And the only thing that didn't go properly is redirecting to the correct page so that I can close this out. Let's just take another quick look and see what could be going wrong. I almost wonder if Adalo just didn't update quickly enough on the back end. This is a rather heavy app. I'm wondering if there was a count issue. But just pushing through here a little bit more. This is the one that is not working. And it should be if the current user child tests count of child test criteria is greater than 2. And we definitely can see here that that condition is true because there's 7. So this might be a mystery for another day, though I hate to leave you all hanging. One cool thing about this technique is that, look, it has reloaded my past record. And so that goes very nicely. Okay, so here we go. It was just an issue of Adalo not quite updating the count quickly enough. And so here we go. This is meant to advance to the test yourself. Because I'm using Zoom in the web preview, it is taking a long time to load, though it is typically much faster. So we can see that's worked out. And if I wanted to go back to the self-test, now I have a fresh one. So hopping into Adalo once more. Yeah, there we are. So we see here's my old record, here is my new one. So as it turns out of the gate, everything was working properly. I got a little impatient and got a little panicky when there were delays. But this is the end-to-end technique of how you can create really awesome user forms. And you could go much further with this, right? You would be able to say, and just talk about some other ways we could use this, is here the only thing inside of this user child test is another list with criteria, but I could add text fields, outside of the inner list, right? I could basically create a bit more space, expand my outer list, and in there I could put checkboxes for true false fields within the parent object. I could put a list that would load another relational object. So there's all sorts of things that we could do. And this is just a beautiful way to create really dynamic and useful forms that aren't bound by the same kind of criteria as the original Adalo forms editor. The thing to be really mindful of while you're doing this is just field validation. So you will have to create your own conditions. You may decide that you want to hide the button based on a certain condition, and you could do that using visibility conditions. You would probably, you may want to use count if your goal is to use multiple conditions, but then you could say something like, let's see if we can figure this out on the fly. If user self-test count, no, that wouldn't be it. If user self-test, I can't link into another object from here. I was hoping I could. Okay, if logged in users, here, yeah, this is of course where I have to be. Self-test criterias. I start to get lost. Okay, if the logged in users, user self-test criteria count is equal to, I guess we'd say is greater than 0, then we would show the button, right? And then usually you'd want to put in its place a kind of inactive state button that would show the user that there will be a button here once you match the criteria. So this is just one, and then I could add more criteria to this, and this would be a way to basically put in the validation so that the user cannot advance. If I had multiple fields, then I could point to, could I point to an input from here? Yeah, I'd have to set this up a little differently, but I could point to inputs that I had on the screen and then say if their values are not empty. So this is a kind of framework that I've figured out in the past couple of days to solve what's been a problem that's come up quite a bit for me. And I leave it to you to see how far you can run with it and what kind of cool, crazy things can be built on top. So thank you and enjoy. And yeah, if you like this video, just hit subscribe because we're going to be putting out more of them.